had a young man in my class, and when I started assigning these projects, he got me aside and he said, Dr. Madden, he said, I'd like to go later in the semester if it's all right with you. And I said, well, what do you think this is? Like a drive-in movie where you can just kind of pick your spot? I said, you know, I've got to move somebody else around. Why should I give you a later time? He said, well, I just need a later time. I finally said, well, okay, you know, whatever. If you put it off isn't going to help. You know, you really ought to go ahead and do it. Well, as time moved along, I got to know the young man. He came by my office a couple of times, and I started asking him questions. And I finally found out the reason he wanted to go later in the semester was he was going to school full time, and he was working from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning as a produce manager at a supermarket. And he literally did not have the money to buy a suit, and he was saving up to buy a suit. And as I got to thinking about that, it's pretty easy sometimes to just deal with students on a very superficial level and not really think in terms of what's going on in their life. But that one little kindness, which I frankly kind of grudgingly gave him, became the basis for our relationship. And he later trusted me and asked me questions about his career and about things he had to do in his life. And I look back on that, I was pretty cynical. You know, I get asked by students a lot, can I turn this in late? You know, can I take the test at a different time? And, you know, after 30 years of that, you feel like you've been lied to by the best, you know. And so when this young man asked me that, my quick response was, no, just do what I told you to do. But once I got to know him and once I got to realize what he was going through in his life, I realized that we really have a choice. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to be irresponsible. It's easy to leave the ball in somebody else's court. It's contagious even to be cynical. I sit on the admissions committee at Baylor. We get a lot of excuses in there. And every now and then we have what we call a cynicism check. We say, are we being affected by the fact that we've heard all these whiny stories? And we stop and talk about it for a minute and kind of recalibrate and go back to that. You know, the question is, do you want to make it better? Do you want to make it worse? Do you think you can make it better by withdrawing and not investing yourself in somebody else? I have a friend who has a little sign, I guess, in his office that he quotes all the time. He says, how can you soar with eagles when you work with turkeys? Well, you know, I got to figure he's one of the turkeys too if he's taken that position on it. In 1984, I had a student from Ghana, which is in West Africa, come into my office one day. I had him all the way through a class. I think I'd probably spoken to him twice in the whole semester other than just class time. And I'll never forget, he said, can we chat? And he came in and he sat down and he told me about his life, told me about some of the problems he had been through, some of the things he'd been able to accomplish. And he said, you know, I'm really pretty much a stranger in America. And he said, if you could help me, just tell me some things that, he said, I'm embarrassed to ask other students about. And I helped him figure out how to get a telephone in our system. I helped him figure out how to buy a car. In fact, I ended up loaning him a little money for a couple of weeks to buy a car. Well, you know, the cynical side of me said, well, you know, he's just going to take the money and go and all of that. But I went ahead and did that. Now, that was, 16 years ago? Since that time, Edward Osei has finished an MBA from Stanford University. He's in the middle of a law degree from Temple University today. He's married. He has one son. His son's name is Madden Osei. He named him after me. Can you imagine a little kid growing up in Philadelphia as an African American whose first name is an Irish last name? I figure he's going to be a fighter, you know, he'll be okay. But that is an honor in that culture that arose out of his being willing to sit down and talk with me, and my being willing to sit there and listen, mostly just listen, and say some very small encouraging things to him when he raised these things with me. Now, I guess it comes down to an old story I'm sure most of you have heard, but this is something I tell myself from time to time when I'm getting tired, when I'm getting irritable, and especially when I'm getting cynical. I get up and I walk around the campus, look in the students' eyes, realize that there is something that we're doing that's very important. The story goes, 3 guys are digging a ditch in the Middle Ages. A visitor walks up and watches them for a few minutes and says, "What are you doing?" to the first one. He says, "I'm digging a ditch, can't you see?" To the second one, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm earning a living." To the third, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a cathedral." Now, they were all doing the same thing, but I got to tell you, the guy building the cathedral was having more fun. So, can we say that while some of us dig ditches and others earn a living, there's still a good number of us that spend our time building cathedrals? The important question is, which one of these are you doing, regardless of what you're doing with your hands and with your brain? Some days I must admit I dig. Some days I think I just earn a living. But I live for those days when I realize what we're really doing in higher education is we're building that cathedral.